2 10, 2 10, 2 2, 2 10, 2 10, 2 10, 2 2, 2 10.
Hey, how are you all, and welcome back to yet another amazing video. And in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how you can optimize World of Warcraft with a new update, and I'm going to be covering all of the best Windows as well as the game settings to increase your FPS, reduce stuttering and rubber banding issues. Make sure to stick around till the end, and with all that said, let's get started with the intro. Alright, step number 1 is the best Windows settings, and for that simply search for settings onto your PC and open it up. Head over to the gaming tab and then click on game bar and turn this thing off. It is an overlay service which keeps using your CPU and GPU resources, and disabling that will help you to get extra FPS. Then go back to gaming, head over to game mode, and this time you're gonna have to turn this thing on. It uses advanced features to optimize your PC by turning things off. Turn this thing off. It is an overlay service which keeps using your CPU and GPU resources, and disabling that will help you to get extra FPS. Then go back to gaming, head over to game mode, and this time you're gonna have to turn this thing on. It uses advanced features to optimize your PC by turning things off in the background. After that, click on the graphic settings underneath, and you have to enable optimizations for windowed games, as it will use advanced features in compatible games to reduce input latency. Click on the graphic settings underneath, and you'll find default high performance GPU. Select your native graphic card over here, and then click on the add desktop app button. You have to go to the download location of your World of Warcraft, so you have to head over to battle.net, World of Warcraft, and you have to go over to retail, and then you'll find wow.exe. Simply click on the add button, and once that is added, scroll all the way down to find it, select it, and for the GPU preference, select high performance over here. Once that is done, simply close it, and now your PC will use your graphic card to render the game. Next step is compatibility settings, and for that go to the same download location, and once you're over here, right click on your wow.exe and click on properties. Click on the compatibility tab and select disable full screen optimizations. This will fix all kind of black screen issues and stuttering issues if that are being caused by the full screen optimizations. Once it is done, click on the apply button and close it. But before moving ahead, I would like to introduce you guys to Sky Coach, which is an amazing platform on applications. And for that, simply search for local group policy editor. So simply click on edit group policy, and then once you're over here, double click on computer configuration, administrative templates, Windows components, and then app privacy. Right over here, you'll find let Windows apps run in the background. Double click to open it up and make sure that this policy is set to enabled. Then for the policy property, you have to select it to force deny and click on the apply button. Once that is done, it will help you to deny all of the applications running in the background, allowing you to get extra FPS. Next step is creating a restore point, and for that, simply search for create a restore point on your PC and simply go over to local disk C. Click on the create button and name it WoW so you can remember it. I highly recommend you guys not to skip this step because in the next step, we're going to be changing some crucial Windows settings. Always good to have a backup, and once that is done, close it and close system properties. The next step is World of Warcraft FPS pack. I'll be leaving a free download link right in the description below. You have 6 folders over here. The first one is CPU priority, in which I have left AMD and Intel CPU priority. Both of these priorities contain correct D-word values for your open up your game and follow the best in game settings. Alright, once you open up your game, press your escape key and then head over to options. Over here you have to come down to system and you'll find graphic settings over here. Set your monitor to your primary monitor and your display mode should be set to full screen. Then for your resolution, you can select your resolution according to your monitor, and the render scale is the one that matters the most over here. If you guys are facing micro stuttering or anything, just slide it down to 95% and see if that fixes it. This will downscale your resolution to get extra FPS, so you guys can try that. Then for vertical sync, I highly recommend you guys to disable that because it imposes a limit on your FPS. For the low latency mode, you guys can go with built-in, or if you guys have other option, you guys can go for that. And then for the anti-aliasing, I have gone with advanced. And for the image based techniques, I have gone with FXAA low. This is really fast and simple, and it is good for better FPS. For the multi-sampling techniques, I have gone with color depth 8x. Once that is done, you have to scroll down and you'll find graphics quality. For the base game quality, I have selected 2, and this will set all of your shadows, liquid detail, particle density, SSAO, depth effect, everything to low. Then you want to have to scroll down and you'll find view distance. You can simply increase that, but it will consume a lot more FPS than you are currently using, so just make sure that you have that in mind. And under the advanced tab, you guys have to disable tripper buffering. For texture filtering, you guys can see that I'm currently using 4x anisotropic. And as soon as I increase this to 60 resolution, if that is available for you, or graphic card, so that simply click on the apply button and simply go back, and now you guys can play your game with the highest FPS possible. That is somewhat around 355 FPS that I'm getting in real time. So guys, that was it for this video. I hope I could have helped you out. If I could have, make sure to do leave a like and smash that
I have helped over 800,000 players optimize their WoW setup to be the best player they can be, and as you can see on screen, I always get questions like, what the hell is your graphic settings and why does your game mechanics look so nice? You see, the default zoom setting handicaps you by forcing you to play with a more zoomed in view. Now, what if I told you there's a way you can actually see the projectile traveling towards you way earlier? There's a little known console command that gives you a 37% boost to how far you can zoom out. And this is a massive advantage because you can now see incoming harmful mechanics way earlier, allowing you above. It's another console command. You can type in what's on screen or simply copy and paste again from the description of this video, and then try zooming in and out. It will make your camera zoom in and out way smoother than it previously was. But the bottom line is this zoom out command hack was a massive game changer for me, but that's not the only. This kind of rebuilding of a higher resolution frame does make the image a bit more blurry, and FSR was then used as a sharpening filter to make the enter again, and you will notice the details here being naturally. This method, it makes your game look between smooth gameplay and essential visual details, where they deprioritize the resource consuming eye candy. And my strategy is similar in two parts. First, I max out specific settings that highlight vital game mechanics that helps me react faster. Then I adjust other settings to boost FPS and to minimize input lag, making the game feel more responsive and smooth to give me an advantage in character movement and reactions. Now, I'm not just going to tell you what settings to change. I'll talk about what each graphic settings does and why I chose that particular setting. That way you understand my reasonings. That means you won't be able to tell the difference between my gameplay as it works. There are three settings, and I call them the three kings because they have the biggest impact in ensuring all gameplay mechanics you need to react to, like AoE, fires, and swirlies on the ground are displayed as clear as they can be. Then there's a bonus fourth setting, which is also impactful, which I call the Prince. So let me explain all four settings because this applies to every thing in the game. So anyway, I want you to locate something called particle density. Put simply, this first setting determines how many bits and pieces you see during flashy moments in the game, such as when the boss spells are being cast, ground AoE is burning, or any similar effects that involve a lot of small moving details. Turning up this setting makes all important PvE mechanics you need to react to look intense, and hence way easier to spot. So always keep this on the highest possible setting. Then you have projected textures. This setting governs how the game shows detailed textures on the ground and other surfaces. Specifically, it allows you to see where the spells will hit, indicating where certain things will land, and is enabled seem to blend all the way to the right. And what you'll notice is that increasing the contrast, you'll see that the colors become way more distinct and they blend less together. And so this is very advantageous for fights where there are swirlies on the ground, because you get a way bigger distinction between the edges of the swirlies versus the safe zones. So if you're trying to min-max, consider playing around 70%, 75% contrast, depending on your tolerance for how dark certain parts of the world will become. Alright, we've covered a lot of theory, but seeing is believing. This is a fight from Dragonflight Season 1, Halls of Valor, you guys might have remembered that. And just to demo to you, if I go to graphics settings, it literally is everything that we have covered. You can see particle density is disabled, texture resolution is low, projected textures is disabled, right? Now I'll scroll through the settings. Contrast is at 50%. I want you to note two things. Firstly, these spinning things on the ground. You can even barely see the edges of the AoE, and just look at these AoE. There's nothing on the ground other than the blades spinning, right? And then look at the drakes. Look at the drakes and the tornadoes that spawn, these white tornadoes. You can barely see the tornadoes. They are so faint, very faint. So just take it in for now, right? There's also supposed to be lightning on the ground as the drake flies by. Now let's literally go into the options and then let's toggle on the important stuff. Specifically, particle density to ultra, texture resolution to high, projected texture to enable, and contrast to 75%. 75% apply. Look at the difference immediately. You can see the AoEs of the blade, that is super clear. Now we wait for the drakes. Look at what's happening with the drakes here. Firstly, you see lightning paths on the ground, and then the world own, and trust me, if you play on 140 FPS versus 60 FPS on a monitor, you will definitely feel the difference. Just ask any professional first-person shooter player. So if you want a buttery smooth gameplay on your ultra high refresh rate monitor, these settings that I'm about to talk about will give you the most bang for your buck. Naturally, these means you forgo the eye candies for raw frames per second, but it really doesn't look that bad. Literally, what you saw in the Halls of Valor encounter, with all the 4 main settings turned on to the highest, that actually looked pretty alright, and it gave you such a great performance boost. But my goal in this section is to educate you on what each of the graphic settings really mean and what it impacts, so you can best decide for yourself what do you want. Depending on how powerful a gaming PC you have, you can then pick the right graphic settings that optimizes between frames per second, visual clarity or mechanics, or eye candy. Now keep in mind, WoW tends to be CPU bottleneck rather than GPU bottleneck. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the specs of your gaming PC. But let's start all the way at the top. You would see that my render scale over here is actually not at 100%, it's at 91%. Yours is probably at 100% by default. You see, render scale determines the resolution at which the game's 3D environment is rendered on your screen. When it's set to 100%, the game renders at your monitor's native resolution or your natural resolution. Lowering the render scale below 100% reduces the resolution the game outputs, which decreases the workload on your system and it frees up more frames per second. So this is really a trade-off between graphic quality and performance, but since you already get the benefits of the fidelity super resolution that we talked about in the sharpening hack in the earlier part of this video, you can actually get away with as low as 90%, which is kind of what I use, without really being able to tell a noticeable difference. And yet, it already frees up 10% more resource. This is a significant FPS game for older PCs. And then next, you have vertical sync. So this synchronizes your game's frame rate with your monitor's refresh rate. When enabled, it prevents screen tearing, a visual artifact that occurs when your monitor displays part of the multiple frames at once, resulting in a disjointed image. Now, typically, you want this disabled, as enabling it adds on to input lag, and it also decreases your frames per second. You only ever want to turn this on if you have serious screen tearing issues with your monitor. Now, if you don't know what screen tearing is, you probably do not have the problem. Turn it off. The next setting, low latency mode. This refers to a feature introduced in Dragonfly expansion. It aims to reduce input latency, which is the delay between when you perform an action, like pressing a key or moving your mouse, versus when it's reflected in the game. This is also known as input lag that I talked about earlier. I can tell you that NVIDIA Reflex plus Boost feels the most reactive for me personally, and I know other game developers like Riot Games and Valorant have been telling people to use NVIDIA Reflex plus Boost where possible. But I also know online that some people saying that this feeling of improvement from using a setting like this comes from a placebo effect, meaning your mind is playing tricks on you. But test it for yourself. I did feel like it helps my character feel slightly more responsive, and hey, every bit helps. Now moving down, you have anti-aliasing. This reduces the appearance of jagged edges, often seen on objects and characters, especially when playing at lower resolutions. So the higher your settings here, the cleaner and more natural edges in the game look, but of course at the cost of performance and frame rates. So what's the sweet spot? Well, I found this setting to be the best for me without a noticeable drop in visual quality, yet better frame rates. You want to set your anti-aliasing to advanced, and then under image-based techniques, use CMAA2, which if you look at this drop-down is not as good as FXAA high, but the performance is so drastically better for what I think is a slight decrease in quality. There's a very bang for buck trade here, and that's what I use. And then you have multi-sample techniques. I recommend going for color 4x, depth 4x. Again, it's not the highest setting, which is the 8x version, but I honestly cannot tell any difference. Without sticking my face onto the monitor and observing the pixel changing, I just can't tell the difference. And yet, between 4x and 8x, 4x definitely gave a noticeable frame rate improvement. Moving on, we have the multi-sample alpha test that you can check over here. This is a setting that determines how WoW evaluates the transparency of objects or textures. The short of it is this: when you enable it, meaning you check the checkbox, it evaluates the transparency at a more detailed level, which can result in smoother edges and textures. But save yourself the trouble, turn this off to save resources and frame rates. Again, another setting I cannot tell the difference unless I stick my face onto the monitor and observe the change in pixels. Then we have camera FOV. Okay, this is a big one. This controls your field of view, or FOV, and how much of the game world you can see at once on your screen. If you change the camera FOV, you are changing the angle at which the camera in the game displays the world. When you increase the FOV, you drag the slider to the right, your view gets bigger. You can see way more of the area around you. However, the game has to render more objects at once, which means you lose frames per second. But my view is that you should play with camera FOV at 90, because that way, along with the zoom hack that we covered at the start of the video, you can see way more. And let me just demonstrate. I have some friends who choose to play it at 80, and when I click apply, just look at how much more cropped in everything is. Right? This is 80 and then this is 90 without zooming in or out. It's just FOV. So if you see it from a top-down perspective, same zoom settings by the way, this is 90 and this is 80. It's so much more cropped in. I recommend playing on 90 and just zooming all the way out like I did, because you can just see way more like that. Look, at the end of the day, I have friends who play on FOV 80 and it's perfectly fine for them. So this is really personal choice. I prefer 90 though. Next up, we go into graphics quality, and just to reiterate what I said earlier, I do not like to have separate settings for raid and battleground. Well, because this tab, if you check this box here, it means that you have separate graphic settings for raid and battleground, right? But what about dungeons? And I do Mythic Plus, so I don't bother with this. I always use base, and this is the only graphic setting list that I have. I don't have a separate setting for raid and battleground. So for base, entering into graphics quality, I set everything to 1 because you will get to tweak and customize them individually anyway. Under shadow quality, this controls how detailed and realistic shadows are in the game. The higher the setting, the more obvious the little nuances are. For example, the specific shape of a tree's leaves on the ground, or the subtle movement of your character's shadows. But at the end of the day, shadow does not play any role in game mechanics. So I definitely turn this down to maximize FPS. Then next you have liquid detail. It controls how water looks in the game. The higher the setting, the more realistic and appealing liquid looks in the game. For example, water reflections and ripples. This is 100% about the game's visual beauty, and there's zero game mechanics that is affected by this. Lower the setting to maximize FPS. Next, we have particle density, which is part of the big 3 that we covered earlier. Keep this on ultra. Next, we have SSAO. This stands for Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, a feature in World of Warcraft that makes lighting in the game more realistic. Essentially, it adds depth to your scenes. It simulates the way light naturally shadows around objects. For example, the areas that are tight and enclosed will look darker, making the game world feel more three-dimensional and rich. But you know it, again, it does nothing to make mechanics stand out more. So lower this setting if you like to save yourself some FPS. Then you have depth effects. So this setting adjusts how some visual elements like light rays, sun shafts, sparkles, how they look in the game by adding depth to them. If you set it to high, the effects become more detailed and realistic. For example, light shining through the trees will look more natural, and the fog will seem thicker and more enveloping. Again, this has zero use for you to react to mechanics, so disable this resource hog if you need those frames. And then next you have compute effects. This affects how certain visuals like the thick fog that seems to fill spaces with a cloud-like appearance, and also other smoke-like particle effects are shown in the game. The higher the setting, the more realistic things are. For example, the in-game fog can look denser and more natural, and the interactions of the particles with one another are more precise. But again, zero impact on how mechanics actually look. Another resource hog, so turn this off for more frames. Next, you have outline mode. This makes certain items or objectives easier to spot by adding a glowing outline around them. This is useful for things like quest items or gathering nodes, as they make them stand out. That said, when you're doing serious content, this setting does nothing for you in combat, so disable this for more FPS. Texture resolution, we covered it in the big 3 settings. For spell density, it controls how many spells you see during gameplay. It controls the visual clutter on your screen, especially when messy instance encounters like raids or battlegrounds are taking place. So when you set it to essential, the game only shows spells that are crucial for you to see, like your own spells. Setting it to everything means you will see every single spell cast by every single one in your raid or your dungeon, which can be visually impressive, but it overwhelms your screen and it makes it very hard to track the critical mechanics you need to respond to. So set this to essential to not only maximize FPS, and it also keeps your screen clean so the only spells or effects you need to see other than your own are the bosses or encounter mechanics, making it way more obvious to react to. Okay, next up we have view distance. This setting adjusts how far of the game world you can see at once. Setting this on high does let you see more buildings and characters from a distance, but at the expense of processing power and frames. So for WoW, game mechanics that you need to react to, they are always immediately in your vicinity. So seeing further does not give you an advantage. This is one of the biggest savers for frames if you lower it, so feel free to do so liberally. Environmental detail. It affects how much of the game's environment, like landscapes and trees, you can see at a distance. Turning this setting up makes the world look fuller in the distance, but it does nothing to help you deal with in-game mechanics. You can set to lowest to maximize FPS. Next up, ground clutter. It controls how much stuff you see on the ground, like grass, leaves, small plants, how far away you start seeing these details. On a high setting, the game looks more lush, due to more greenery and small ground detail. But just know that this does you no favor when it comes to dodging mechanics, especially ground effects. In fact, a lower setting not only grants you more frames per second, it makes ground AoE way easier to see, especially in outdoor encounters where there is vegetation. Then you have triple buffering. This is something you can check or uncheck. This is a setting that helps you smooth out sudden changes in the frame rates of the game. When you disable it, the game defaults to double buffering, which renders the next frame while displaying the current frame to you. Triple buffering, when you enable it, it adds yet another frame to the queue, resulting in a 2-frame lag. This extra buffering can introduce a tiny delay between when you input a command and from when you see the results on the screen, which adds to input latency that we talked about earlier. Now, I am a min-maxer, so even if it's a 1-frame lag, I still believe in disabling this to ensure my character is more responsive in reacting to my inputs to dodge mechanics. Scrolling down further, texture filtering. This affects how sharp and detailed textures appear, especially when viewed from an angle. So at maximum, the textures retain their sharpness and clarity, even when you are looking at them from the side or from a distance. My take is that you comfortably can use it at 4x. That saves you frames and things still looks pretty good, so you don't have to go all the way up to 16x. 4x is great. Then you have the ray trace shadow. Enhances the quality of shadows using advanced rendering techniques called ray tracing. This method creates shadows that are more realistic, they have softer edges, and they are more accurate. It also allows for shadows to be cast from additional light sources, so it adds depth and detail to the game's visuals. But it is an absolute FPS killer, so I always have this disabled. Again, there's no game mechanics that actually benefit from ray tracing, so disable this. Up next, you have ambient occlusion type, and you have a setting of some that you can select auto detect, and these two. Ambient occlusion is the concept in graphics where the overall lightness affecting a surface in the environment is diminished by the presence of other nearby surfaces. Those other surfaces will block or occlude some of the non-directional scattered light in the scene from reaching the affected surface. Okay, if it sounds complicated, just know that in the options, just pick Fidelity FX CA-CAO. This is the newer ambient occlusion technique that was introduced to WoW, starting in the Shadowlands expansion. So in short, it gives you the same visual quality, but amongst all the options, it uses the least resource usage. So pick Fidelity CA-CAO. Now, resample quality, we have already covered this during the sharpening hack part of this video. Leave this setting alone. Do not touch. Moving on to VRS mode, this is introduced in Dragonflight, and this feature controls the intensity of a feature called variable frame shading. It's designed to boost performance in modern-day GPU by reducing the complexity of smaller shaded objects, while allocating more processing power for more complex ones. Basically, if you enable it, VRS mode breaks on-screen images down into blocks, and then it decides their importance and saves processing power from shading unnecessary areas that the players can't see. Now, if you have access to this, you can keep it on standard, but if you're like me, you have it disabled because you don't have access to it. Next up, you have physics interaction. It allows you to choose how much of the game's physics affect your character and other objects in the environment. Honestly, picking none has no impact on your ability to deal with game mechanics, so in the spirit of maximizing FPS, feel free to pick none like me. Now, if you scroll further down all the way to the bottom, you will see max foreground FPS, background FPS, target FPS. Max foreground FPS means that if you enable it, when the game is currently active as a window, what is the maximum FPS? In this case, it's capped at 60 FPS, and that's why at the bottom right over here, you see it's 60 FPS. The moment I uncheck it, you can see my frame rate spiking all the way to about 140 FPS, which is what my monitor can basically display. Again, you're on YouTube. You can't see the difference between 60 FPS and 140 FPS because YouTube caps at 60 FPS. But that's the purpose of this function. And then there's a max background FPS, which means when you tab out, alternate tab out of WoW, what is the maximum frame rate you want WoW to be running on in the background? So you can set this to like 30, 20, 10, so that when you are tapped out of WoW watching Netflix or something, WoW is running with 10 FPS in the background. So it saves resources. And then there's target FPS, which basically says you enable this to
Yeah.
dynamically reduce graphic quality if you
Nice.
fall below a specific frame rate. So basically if I check it and I'm below 60 FPS, WoW would dynamically adjust certain graphic settings to push me towards 60 FPS. But I've heard a lot of problems with this. People who have enabled it, sometimes you will notice a micro stutter. And that's really because your game is reconfiguring the graphic settings just to hit the target FPS. And there's a slight stutter. It doesn't happen to everyone, but as you can see from the comments here, from the official WoW
Unde să vin?
forums, this is a thing people have experienced.
Acum.
So I always have this toggled off if possible. And then we have resample sharpness that we covered earlier when we were talking about the sharpening filter and hack. And then contrast and brightness, we've also covered them in the earlier part of this video. Gamma is simply just how bright your game is. Again, personal preference. So let's do a
Mulțumesc.
demo. I will keep the 3 kings and 1 prince at its maximum setting.
Viu
All the other
acum, Andy.
settings that we've covered at its lowest to maximize frame rates. You see in the middle, this is the WoW default FPS counter. And with a setup like that, I'm currently hovering around 140 frames per second. Again, a reminder to you, you can't see the 140 frames on YouTube. You can only see a maximum of 60 frames per second on YouTube. But if you have a gaming monitor, like I've said in this video, you can definitely tell the difference. That is why professional players insist they have high
Acum
refresh rate
vin.
monitors at official gaming tournaments. Now the game still looks pretty good. It has a burning fire, there's particle effects on the mobs, things still look pretty good. But let's go and crank everything up to maximum now, right? I'll put everything to its maximum. And now it is
Acum-
at its best quality. Look at the frame rates that have dropped. It is easily hovering around 60 frames of decrease. Now remember, I'm playing at 1440p. Maybe some of you who play on 4K might even see a more drastic reduction. So resolution will matter. But the point is, you can save so much more frames per second just by applying all these settings I've covered while retaining the highest standards and bar for the 3 kings and the 1 prince. If you found this video helpful, all I ask from you, hit the subscribe button. I am so very close to 100,000 subscribers. We are less than 5% away. It's my lifetime goal. Your subscription to you is entirely free, but it means everything to me. And if you have that one guildie or friend who's always getting hit by
Da,
game
e o
mechanics,
iubire
send
mea.
this video to them.
Trebuie
If this guy
iubirea.
was a game changer, I have another video here that will be an absolute game changer for leveling up your WoW experience. I've helped over 800,000 players optimize their WoW setup to be the best player they can be. And one of the most common questions I've gotten, what is the best keybinds to use? This video guide will serve as the
Să ne înțelegem, nu eu am făcut asta. Noi, țara, noi, stat, noi. Bine m-am regăsit, prieteni. Da, e ciudat să zici chestia asta. Cum adică Eminescu, anestezic local, anestezic regional. Care o fi anestezistul și de ce trebuie anestezie? Plec de la Iași. De fapt, am plecat deja, de un ceas. Către Secuine. La Iași, asociația Hai Că Se Poate, o conferință foarte, foarte faină despre autostrada A7, aia dinspre sud către Moldova și autostrada A8, aia dinspre Moldova către vest, către occident, către Târgu Mureș, către Budapesta, către Viena, către tot. Povești foarte faine, oameni foarte faini, antreprenori care știu că trebuie să-și ducă firmele mai departe pentru ca statul să beneficieze și noi să beneficiem de taxe, impozite, etc., etc. Politicieni, ca de obicei dezbinați. Asociația civică, asta, Hai Că Se Poate, care a făcut un efort imens, începând de la financiar până la formula aia de organizare în care ajungi acasă la 12 noaptea și nu poți dormi până la 2, că încă se învârt rotițele despre ce trebuie să faci. Ok, hai să mergem la Eminescu. Merge și la Cuza, că și Cuza e un anestezic senzațional. De ce? De câte ori au cerut cei din Moldova ceva concret, infrastructură, investiții, etc., etc., chestiuni pe care să le simți în viața de zi cu zi, cum ar fi autostrada, de exemplu, da? Sau autostrăzi. Mă, întotdeauna a venit cineva din statul român, stânga-dreapta nu contează, nu vorbim despre partide aici, care să le oblojească nevoile spunându-le,
Înțeleg.
domnule, mare capitală culturală este Iași. Moldova, care l-a dat pe Eminescu, l-a dat pe Ion Creangă, pe Ciprian Porumbescu l-a mai dat, pe Cuza l-a mai dat. Și în momentul ăla, spiritele, din păcate, spune eu, se calmează. Moldoveanul, în principiu, nu toți moldovenii, wow, ne recunosc valoarea. Cei de la guvern, nu zic cei de la București, să nu se interpreteze ceva cu orașul, de la guvern. Dar, de fapt, ăsta este un anestezic. Adică, băi, le-am zis moldovenilor că stați în cultură, le-am zis. Bă, am fost de 15 ianuarie și de 15 iunie și am depus niște coroane. Am depus. Bă, la 24 ianuarie am tras o horă adevărată și după un pic de fasole cu ciolat. Am tras. De ce mai vor moldoveni? Gata. Ce tot atâta chestii? Doar că trebuie să știți niște chestii care țin de istorie. Moldovenii cer, și citez, o cale spre vest din 1866. Eu la matematică nu sunt prea bun, am înțeles la ce folosește matematica, am citit și chiar Feynman despre fizică, înțeleg că este despre natura Universului, dar la calcule o trebuie să mă duc pe telefon. 2025 minus 1866, cred că bine rețin, mi-a dat 159. De 159 de ani, din Moldova se cere o cale spre vest. Pentru că trebuie să mergi, trebuie să aduci plus valoare. Cum aduci plus valoare? Aduci plus valoare exportând. Da? În 1919, dacă vă uitați, sper să găsiți pe undeva Memoriul Ieșenilor. Memoriul Ieșenilor către autorități. O pe drum, bravo! Cam așa vin de la guvernele din România, de vreo 159 de ani, veștile despre Moldova. Să ne fie rușine, tovarăși, să fim fericiți.
Se numește Tyler Robinson și are 22 de ani. Autoritățile din Statele Unite l-au prins pe suspectul din ancheta asasinării activistului ultraconservator Charlie Kirk. Eram în război hibrid și nu știam. Nicușor Dan pune un diagnostic, dar continuă să evalueze viitoarele numiri de la vârful serviciilor secrete. Femicidul din Mureș, 4 polițiști sunt cercetați disciplinar. Și măcinată de probleme vechi de decenii, Poșta Română plătește 50.000 de euro pentru o strategie de imagine. E vineri, ascultați știrile zilei de la Recorder.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him in custody.
Cred că l-am prins. Cu un grad ridicat de certitudine pot spune că e în custodia poliției. Donald Trump a anunțat în direct la televiziune că presupusul asasin al activistului ultraconservator Charlie Kirk a fost prins la mai bine de 24 de ore de la atacul armat comis într-o universitate din statul Utah. Suspectul, potrivit președintelui, ar fi fost denunțat de către o persoană foarte apropiată. Aceasta ar fi luat legătura cu tatăl suspectului, care l-ar fi convins mai apoi să se predea. Președintele a adăugat că își dorește un proces rapid care să se încheie cu o condamnare la moarte. Guvernatorul statului Utah l-a identificat ulterior pe suspect drept Tyler Robinson, în vârstă de 22 de ani. Familia acestuia le-a declarat anchetatorilor că el devenise mai interesat de politică în ultimii ani și că acum câteva zile le-ar fi spus rudelor sale că Charlie Kirk este plin de ură și că răspândește ura. Potrivit guvernatorului Spencer Cox, 3 dintre cartușele găsite în apropierea presupusei arme a crimei fuseseră inscripționate. Pe unul dintre cartușe scria "Hei fascistule, prinde", iar pe un altul apărea un fragment din refrenul cântecului popular italian Bella Ciao, asociat cu mișcarea de rezistență antifascistă din cel de-al doilea război mondial. Tyler Robinson nu era student al universității în campusul căreia s-a produs atacul. Vehement criticat între altele pentru arestările inițiale făcute în acest caz, două persoane fără vreo implicare în asasinat, Kash Patel, directorul FBI, s-a exprimat în mod neobișnuit de direct pentru un ocupant al acestei funcții. El le-a mulțumit insistent lui Donald Trump și vicepreședintelui J.D. Vance pentru că, citez, ne-au ținut spatele în tot acest timp. După care l-a invocat pe activistul ucis. Citez din nou, odihnește-te frate, veghem noi mai departe. Ne vedem în Valhalla.
To my friend Charlie Kirk. Rest now, brother. We have the watch. And I'll see you in Valhalla.